The Third Great Ninja War did not begin with a declaration. It did not begin with a speech from a Kage, nor with an army crossing a clearly marked border beneath a rising sun. It began in quieter ways, in exhausted villages that had signed peace treaties without ever addressing the wounds beneath them. It began in shortages, in mistrust, in the uneasy silence that follows a conflict not fully resolved. By the time open battle erupted across the 5 great nations, the war had already been growing for years, like cracks spreading through stone long before the collapse becomes visible. The Second Great Ninja War had officially ended, but peace was never truly secured. It was negotiated, forced into existence through fatigue rather than reconciliation. The great villages, Konohagakure, Sunagakure, Iwagakure, Kumogakure, and Kirigakure, had all suffered devastating losses. Entire platoons erased. Legendary shinobi scarred both physically and psychologically. Infrastructure destroyed. Economies weakened. Borders redrawn without consensus. When the treaties were signed, they were signed by leaders who needed time to rebuild, not by leaders who had forgiven. And so the world rested. But it did not heal. Smaller nations bore the worst of it. Lands like the hidden Rain Village, Amegakure, were turned into battlegrounds precisely because they lacked the power to defend themselves against larger forces. Major villages fought their wars not in their own streets, but in someone else's fields. Entire generations in these border regions grew up with war as background noise. Rain that never stopped falling on shattered rooftops. Smoke rising from distant clashes. Foreign shinobi treating their homeland as expendable terrain. When great powers clash, the small are crushed between them. The Third Great Ninja War emerged from this imbalance. Resources were scarce. Recovery was uneven. Certain villages rebounded faster than others. Konohagakure, the hidden leaf, still possessed strong leadership and formidable shinobi. The legacy of the first Hokage's vision had not completely faded. Iwagakure, the hidden stone, hardened by mountainous isolation and military discipline, viewed any shift in balance as a threat. Kumogakure, the hidden cloud, pursued aggressive strength building to avoid ever being cornered again. Each village interpreted peace differently. Some saw it as recovery time, others as opportunity. Border tensions escalated quietly. Skirmishes broke out over supply routes. Intelligence units reported increased movement near disputed territories. Alliances formed not out of trust, but out of strategic necessity. Rumors circulated of villages testing one another's defenses through proxy conflicts, sending smaller units to probe for weakness without triggering full-scale retaliation. This was not chaos. It was calculation And beneath these calculations was something older and more dangerous: pride. The shinobi world was still shaped by the philosophies of its founders. The first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, had envisioned cooperation between clans and villages as a path to stability. Madara Uchiha had foreseen inevitable betrayal and endless rivalry. Their ideological conflict did not end with their deaths. It lingered in policies, in military academies, in the way children were trained to view other nations. Peace was taught as a temporary state. Preparedness for war was permanent. The Third Great Ninja War became inevitable, not because leaders desired destruction, but because the system itself demanded vigilance. Shinobi villages are militarized societies. Their economic survival depends on missions, security contracts, and displays of strength. When external threats diminish, internal anxieties grow. Leaders fear appearing weak. Villages fear being outpaced. Arms races begin quietly. More advanced jutsu research, more specialized assassination squads, younger graduates pushed into active duty earlier than before. It is here that the tragedy deepens, because this is the war that normalized child soldiers. The academy graduation age dropped in some regions. Prodigies were fast-tracked into dangerous missions. The justification was always the same: necessity, survival. If a 12-year-old possessed exceptional ability, then denying that ability battlefield use was framed as wasteful. The line between protection and exploitation blurred. In Konohagakure, a generation was growing up under this philosophy. Children who would later define history. Among them were Kakashi Hatake, Obito Uchiha, and Rin Nohara. They trained not in a time of true peace, but in anticipation of renewed conflict. Their instructors spoke of duty with calm voices, of sacrifice as honor, of missions as obligations greater than personal fear. They were too young to remember the last war clearly, but they would fight in the next one. Meanwhile, beyond the borders of the major nations, the hidden rain village suffered continuously. Positioned geographically between powerful neighbors, Amegakure became the stage upon which larger disputes were acted out. Foreign shinobi crossed through its territory. Battles scarred its infrastructure. Leadership within the village hardened under constant siege mentality. The civilians there did not debate politics. They endured consequences. It is important to understand that the Third Great Ninja War did not explode everywhere at once. It ignited in pockets. A supply convoy ambushed. A reconnaissance unit eliminated near a border. Retaliation missions escalating in intensity. Soon, official denials gave way to mobilizations. Shinobi forces were stationed permanently near contested regions. Defensive measures transformed into preemptive strikes. The war did not begin because one nation attacked another outright. It began because distrust had never faded. In the Hidden Leaf, the leadership faced difficult decisions. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, was aging. The legendary Sannin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru had already forged their reputations in previous conflicts. Yet even legends cannot be everywhere at once. The burden of this new war would fall heavily on younger shinobi rising through the ranks. Among them, a particular name began appearing more frequently in mission reports: Minato Namikaze. At this stage, he was not yet the Yellow Flash. He was a promising jonin, known for sharp intellect and unusual spatial techniques inherited and refined from the second Hokage's Flying Thunder God formula: calm, analytical, precise. He possessed none of the arrogance often associated with prodigies. Instead, he carried quiet focus. No one yet realized how decisively he would shape the conflict. As the war intensified, supply lines became targets of primary importance. Smaller strike teams were deployed deep into enemy territory to sabotage infrastructure rather than engage in large-scale open combat. Intelligence warfare became just as critical as direct confrontation. Shinobi vanished behind enemy lines for weeks at a time. Assassinations increased. Trust between nations deteriorated completely. And through it all, the world outside the battlefield attempted to continue living. Markets reopened in safer districts. Children still attended academy classes. Farmers planted crops, uncertain whether they would be harvested. Life did not pause for war. It simply adapted around it. But adaptation is not healing. By the time historians would later label it the Third Great Ninja War, those living through it did not see it as a defined chapter. They experienced it as accumulation of tension, of loss, of hardened ideology. There was no singular spark dramatic enough to define the beginning, only a gradual acceptance that another generation would be shaped by violence. This war would not introduce gods or alien origins. It would shape humans. It would turn Kakashi into a prodigy too burdened by guilt to enjoy his genius. It would fracture Obito's optimism into something far darker. It would scar the Hidden Rain so deeply that children there would grow into revolutionaries. It would elevate Minato into legend and position him as the fourth Hokage. It would plant seeds that would later grow into the Nine Tails attack, the Uchiha massacre, and ultimately the Fourth great ninja war. But in this first stage, none of that is visible yet. All that exists is tension, a world pretending to be at peace, a generation training for battles they do not yet understand, and borders that feel less like lines on a map and more like fault lines waiting to split. If the great nations experienced the third great ninja war as tension and calculation, the hidden rain experienced it as weather. In Omegakure, war was not an event that arrived with fanfare. It was constant. It was the sound of distant explosions blending with thunder. It was foreign chakra signatures passing overhead like migrating storms. It was rooftops rebuilt only to be shattered again weeks later. The rain never seemed to stop there, and in time it became difficult to tell whether the dampness on the streets came from the sky or from the aftermath of battle. Geographically, the land of rain sits in a tragic position. Nestled between larger powers, often bordering the land of fire, the land of earth, and the land of wind, it became the natural corridor through which armies moved. Larger nations rarely fought directly within their own capitals. Instead, they clashed in territories that lacked the strength to resist becoming battlefields. Omegakure was not weak in spirit, but it was small. Its population and military force could not rival the giants surrounding it. And so, it endured. The leader of the hidden rain during this era was Hanzo of the Salamander, a shinobi so formidable that even the legendary Sanin of Konohagakure once struggled against him. Hanzo's reputation was not built on reckless aggression, but on ruthless pragmatism. He understood the vulnerability of his nation. He understood that survival required projecting strength so overwhelming that no one would dare fully invade. So he ruled through fear. Hanzo fortified Omegakure into a militarized state. Surveillance was constant. Outsiders were treated with suspicion bordering on hostility. Shinobi were trained not just for defense, but for assassination and suppression. His iron grip kept larger nations from absorbing the land of rain outright. But it came at a cost. Civilian life tightened under authoritarian control. Dissent was dangerous. Hope became fragile. And in the narrow alleyways beneath endless rainfall, 3 children learned to survive in this world. Nagato, Yahiko, Konan. They were not born into legend. They were born into rubble. During the Second Great Ninja War, Nagato's parents were killed by foreign shinobi who mistook them for enemy combatants. The apology came too late to matter. A frightened child stood alone in a house soaked with rain and grief. In that moment of trauma, something extraordinary awakened within him. The Rinnegan, eyes far older than the conflict surrounding him. But power did not bring safety. Nagato wandered alone until he encountered Yahiko and Konan, two other orphans shaped by the same relentless violence. Yahiko was defiant, loud, unwilling to let despair define him. Konan was observant, steady, finding small structures of order, even in chaos. Together, they scavenged food, avoided patrols, and learned to read the rhythms of conflict the way others might read seasons. War was not ideology to them. It was hunger. It was hiding beneath floorboards while explosions rattled metal beams. It was watching shinobi leap across rooftops as if the streets below did not contain families trying to live. During the Third Great Ninja War, these conditions intensified. Hanzo's efforts to maintain a Megakura's sovereignty meant constant vigilance. Larger nations viewed the Land of Rain as both strategic and expendable. Skirmishes broke out regularly within its borders. Supply routes cut across its terrain. Espionage units infiltrated and withdrew like ghosts. The people of the Rain adapted in ways that hardened them. Children learned to distinguish between different villages' headbands by silhouette alone. They learned which chakra signatures signaled immediate danger. They learned that survival meant staying invisible. And yet, even here, something unexpected occurred. During one of his travels, Jiraiya of the Sannin encountered the three orphans. He saw in them not enemies, not tools, but children shaped by circumstances beyond their control. For a brief period, he stayed in the hidden rain to train them. It was an unusual act, a leaf shinobi teaching potential enemies. But Jiraiya's philosophy differed from the strict pragmatism dominating the era. He believed that understanding might someday break the cycle. Under his guidance, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan learned ninjutsu not merely as weapons, but as expressions of will. Yahiko dreamed openly of peace, not the forced peace of dominance, but genuine understanding between nations. Nagato listened quietly, absorbing both technique and ideology. Konan refined her paper-based abilities with meticulous care, turning fragility into precision. For a short time, there was something like hope. But the Third Great Ninja War did not pause for small dreams. As Jiraiya eventually departed, believing his students capable of shaping their own future, the conflict continued to escalate around them. Hanzo's paranoia deepened. External pressures mounted. The rain remained a crossroads for violence, and the seeds planted in those children began to grow in directions no one could yet foresee. The war's brutality in the hidden reign was different from the large-scale clashes between major villages. It was intimate. It invaded homes. It blurred the line between soldier and civilian. It fostered resentment not only toward foreign invaders, but toward the entire shinobi system that made such invasions normal. Nagato watched as cycles repeated. Armies entered. Armies withdrew. Promises were made. Nothing fundamentally changed. The question began forming quietly within him. If shinobi villages exist to prevent chaos, why does chaos follow them? Yahiko answered differently. He believed reform was possible, that if a new organization could unite shinobi across nations under a banner of mutual protection, perhaps smaller lands would no longer be trampled. The idea was radical, almost naive, but it was born from lived suffering rather than ambition. The early concept of the Akatsuki took root here, not as a criminal syndicate, but as a peace movement. A small group of Rain shinobi determined to stand independently from the manipulation of greater powers. Their symbol would eventually mean fear across the world. But in its earliest form, it represented defiance against becoming collateral damage. Meanwhile, the larger nations barely noticed. To Konohagakure, Iwagakure, Kumogakure, and Sunagakure, the third great ninja war was a strategic chessboard of shifting alliances and territorial control. To the hidden reign, it was existence itself. Hanzo continued consolidating power, viewing independent movements within his village as threats. External wars justified internal suppression. Any gathering of idealistic youth risked being labeled subversive. In times of conflict, authoritarianism often strengthens under the guise of security. The rain kept falling, and in that rain, children hardened into revolutionaries. What makes this stage of the war so tragically important is that it produced two responses to suffering that would later collide catastrophically. Nagato would come to believe that peace can only be enforced through overwhelming pain, that if the world experiences loss on a scale so devastating, it will fear repeating it. Obito Uchiha, shaped by this same war in a different land, would come to believe that reality itself must be replaced with illusion to end suffering. Both philosophies trace back to this era, to villages used as battlegrounds, to children forced to grow up too quickly, to a system that valued stability for the powerful while accepting devastation for the small. The third great ninja war was not yet at its most explosive phase. The legendary feats of Minato had not fully unfolded. The tragedy of Hanabi Bridge had not yet rewritten Team Minato's future. But here, in the rain-soaked streets of Omegakure, the emotional foundation was already laid. Despair was being cultivated, and unlike the great nations, which would one day sign treaties and declare the war over, the hidden rain would carry its consequences forward long after the official fighting ceased. Because some wars do not end when the battles stop. They continue in the hearts of the children who survived them. Long before his name inspired retreat orders across enemy lines, before entire battalions were instructed to flee on sight, before the title of Hokage was ever spoken in the same breath as his own, Minato Namikaze was simply a shinobi moving quietly through a world on the edge of collapse. The Third Great Ninja War did not create Minato, but it revealed him. In Konohagakure, the Hidden Leaf Village, the war effort demanded more than brute strength. The previous conflicts had proven that overwhelming force alone could not guarantee stability. Intelligence, mobility, and surgical precision were becoming increasingly vital. Open field clashes were costly. Villages had learned that dismantling supply lines and eliminating command structures could cripple an enemy more effectively than throwing thousands into a single decisive battle. Minato's skill set emerged perfectly suited for this shift. Calm by nature, observant, and astonishingly fast in both thought and movement, he refined a technique originally created by the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju, the Flying Thunder, God technique. What Tobirama had developed as an advanced space-time ninjutsu, Minato transformed into something fluid and devastatingly efficient. The technique allowed instantaneous movement to a marked location, not high-speed travel, but true teleportation. It required preparation, precise formula seals placed in advance, and exceptional chakra control. Most shinobi viewed the technique as too complex to use regularly. Minato treated it like breathing. At first, his missions were typical of elite jonin assignments: infiltration, reconnaissance, escort operations. But as the war intensified, commanders began noticing patterns in after-action reports. Enemy positions dismantled before reinforcements could respond. Supply depots destroyed without prolonged engagement. Entire squads incapacitated in seconds, often unable to report what had even occurred. There were no drawn-out duels, no theatrical displays of power, just a flash of movement and silence afterward. It was not merely speed that defined Minato's rising legend. It was timing. He appeared exactly where he was needed, exactly when intervention would shift the entire tide of engagement. The battlefield began to feel smaller wherever he operated. Enemy forces confident in numerical advantage, found themselves disoriented by the collapse of their formation center before they could adjust. In war, perception spreads faster than facts. Rumors moved through the ranks of Iwagakure and Kumogakure, a leaf shinobi who could not be surrounded, a man who marked targets and returned to them at will, a flash of yellow hair preceding defeat. Soldiers began speaking his name with caution. Officers began planning around the possibility of his presence, even when intelligence suggested he was elsewhere. The fear was not irrational. Minato's tactical application of flying thunder, God, allowed him to chain movements across an entire battlefield. A kunai marked with his formula thrown behind enemy lines became an anchor point. Another, placed near an ally, created a defensive pivot. He could intercept attacks aimed at his comrades before the attackers understood he was present. He could eliminate high-priority targets and vanish before countermeasures formed. It was warfare compressed into seconds. But perhaps what made Minato uniquely suited to this era was not only his technique, it was his disposition. He did not revel in destruction. He did not taunt opponents. His movements were efficient, almost gentle in their inevitability. He fought not with visible rage, but with clarity. In a war defined by suspicion and pride, that calmness made him difficult to predict. The Third Great Ninja War was chaotic across multiple fronts. Iwagakure's Earth-style specialists fortified defensive positions in mountainous terrain. Kumogakure's lightning-enhanced fighters favored aggressive strikes. Sunagakure navigated desert logistics with brutal efficiency. Each village adapted its strengths to its geography. Minato adapted to all of them. In rocky terrain, he placed seals within crevices and blind spots, turning the environment itself into a network of teleportation nodes. In forests, he marked trees in advance, allowing instantaneous repositioning during ambushes. On open plains, he scattered tri-pronged kunai across wide arcs, creating overlapping pathways invisible to the untrained eye. He did not overpower terrain. He integrated with it. And gradually, the Leaf Village began leaning on him more heavily. Commanders tasked him with high-risk missions, requiring rapid response across dispersed units. His presence became a stabilizing factor for younger shinobi deployed into dangerous zones. Morale shifted subtly when word spread that Minato was operating nearby. Confidence increased. Coordination sharpened. The war, unpredictable and brutal, felt momentarily manageable. But legends are built on contrast. As Minato's name rose, so too did the cost of the war elsewhere. Casualty lists lengthened. Academy graduates were pushed into active duty earlier than previous generations. Kakashi Hatake, a prodigy promoted to jonin at an age when most were still adjusting to teamwork, entered this environment shaped by Minato's leadership. Minato's squad, Kakashi, Obito, and Rin, reflected different responses to the same era. Kakashi embraced strict adherence to mission rules, believing discipline minimized loss. Obito clung to optimism, insisting comrades mattered more than regulations. Rin acted as the emotional anchor, bridging extremes quietly. Minato watched them carefully. He understood something that few did at the time. The war was not only fought in enemy territory, it was fought within the hearts of the young shinobi being shaped by it. Even as his own legend expanded, he made time to instruct, to guide, to encourage growth beyond combat efficiency. He saw potential in Obito that others overlooked. He tempered Kakashi's rigidity with perspective. He treated Rin not as support, but as integral. It is easy, in hindsight, to view Minato solely as the yellow flash, an unstoppable force. But during the Third Great Ninja War, he was also a teacher, navigating the moral erosion of his era. The decisive turning point in his legend came during escalating confrontations with Iwagakure. The Hidden Stone had mobilized significant forces along contested borders, aiming to exploit perceived leaf vulnerabilities. Their strategy relied on overwhelming numbers and fortified positions. Conventional counterattacks would have required heavy losses. Instead, Minato dismantled their formations before they solidified. Accounts vary in detail, but one pattern remains consistent. Entire units were neutralized before coordination could occur. Officers struck down seconds after issuing commands, reinforcements arriving to find silence where resistance should have been. Eventually, Iwagakure issued a rare and telling order to its shinobi. If you encounter the yellow flash, retreat immediately. This was not strategic exaggeration. It was survival protocol. Few individual shinobi in history inspired such directives during active war. Yet even as his fame spread, Minato did not appear consumed by it. Those who observed him closely noted that each mission weighed on him. He did not celebrate kill counts. He did not speak of enemies with contempt. His focus remained on ending engagements quickly, minimizing collateral damage, preventing drawn-out suffering. In this sense, Minato represented a fleeting ideal within the shinobi system. Extraordinary power wielded without arrogance. But ideals, like peace, are fragile in wartime. The Third Great Ninja War would soon test him not only as a combatant, but as a mentor. Because while Minato was reshaping battlefields across nations, events were unfolding that would fracture his own team permanently. The Kannabi Bridge mission loomed on the horizon, a tactical strike designed to cripple Iwagakure's supply routes. It would elevate Minato's strategic brilliance further, and it would begin the chain reaction that reshaped the entire shinobi world. For now, though, the legend grows. A flash across the battlefield, a name whispered in caution, and a young jonin whose speed is beginning to alter the course of history. By the time the Third Great Ninja War reached its most volatile phase, something deeply unsettling had already become normal. Children were no longer being trained for a distant future. They were being prepared for immediate deployment. Konohagakure, like the other great villages, justified this acceleration through necessity. Casualties mounted, missions multiplied, strategic fronts required reinforcement, and within the academy walls, prodigies were identified earlier, promoted faster, and sent into environments that would shape them more brutally than any classroom ever could. Kakashi Hatake stood at the center of this shift. The son of the white fang of the leaf, Sakumo Hatake, Kakashi had inherited not only immense talent, but also the quiet weight of a tragedy that had shaken the village. His father, once revered, had chosen to abandon a critical mission in order to save his comrades, a decision that led to disgrace and ultimately suicide after public condemnation. The lesson Kakashi absorbed from that story was not one of compassion. It was one of consequence. Failure to complete a mission destroys lives. That belief hardened early. Gifted beyond his peers, Kakashi graduated the academy at a young age and advanced through the ranks with astonishing speed. His intelligence was razor-sharp. His combat instincts were refined. By the time many children were still adjusting to Genin teamwork, Kakashi was promoted to Jonin. On paper, it was an extraordinary achievement. In practice, it was isolation. He was younger than many he commanded. He was expected to lead missions in a war zone where hesitation cost lives. The adults around him praised his discipline. They trusted his judgment. But praise in wartime rarely acknowledges the burden beneath it. Within Team Minato, the contrast was immediate. Obito Uchiha was not a prodigy. He struggled with basic techniques. He arrived late. He spoke impulsively. But beneath the clumsiness was something rare: stubborn optimism. Obito believed in comrades over rules. He believed in becoming Hokage, not through dominance, but through recognition and connection. Where Kakashi viewed missions as sacred obligations, Obito saw them as shared experiences. Rin Nohara stood quietly between them, competent, compassionate, perceptive, Rin carried the emotional equilibrium of the team. She supported Kakashi's precision while validating Obito's heart. She was not the loudest voice, nor the most technically overwhelming fighter, but her steadiness mattered more than either of them realized at the time. And above them was Minato Namikaze, already earning his reputation across battlefields, yet patient in his mentorship. The war intensified around them. Missions grew riskier. The line between training exercise and lethal engagement disappeared entirely. What once would have been considered advanced assignments were now standard operations for young shinobi. Enemy villages were not sparring partners. They were soldiers hardened by their own losses and ideologies. For Kakashi, the battlefield validated his philosophy. Strict adherence to rules ensured survival. Deviations introduced chaos. He recited the code almost mechanically. Those who break the rules are scum. Mission success defines worth. Obito rejected that framework instinctively. To him, abandoning a comrade was worse than failing an objective. The two perspectives clashed frequently, not explosively, but persistently. Frustration simmered in small exchanges. Arguments ended without resolution. Minato observed without forcing immediate correction. He understood something that neither boy could yet articulate. They were responding to trauma differently. Kakashi, shaped by his father's downfall, clung to structure as protection. Obito, lacking similar prestige, but yearning for acknowledgement, gravitated toward emotional bonds as validation. The Third Great Ninja War sharpened these differences. On one mission, Team Minato encountered enemy shinobi far more experienced than themselves. The fight was brief and brutal. Kakashi's tactical calculations ensured victory, but only narrowly. Obito hesitated at a critical moment, not from fear, but from concern for Rin's safety. The tension afterward lingered. Kakashi criticized inefficiency. Obito criticized coldness. Rin tried to mend what she sensed widening. This dynamic, discipline versus empathy, mirrors the larger shinobi system itself. Villages function because missions are completed. Borders remain intact because orders are obeyed. Yet individuals survive because someone chooses them over abstract success. The war did not provide easy answers. It forced choices under pressure. Elsewhere, across other nations, similar stories unfolded. Young shinobi in Iwagakure were drilled relentlessly in Earth-style fortification and group coordination. Kumogakure trained lightning-fast assault units, emphasizing aggression and synchronized strikes. Kirigakure, known for its brutal academy graduation practices, hardened its students through lethal competition even before deployment. A generation was being conditioned simultaneously across the continent, and they were meeting one another in combat. There is a particular cruelty in children fighting children under banners they barely understand. Not because they lack skill, many were exceptionally skilled, but because their beliefs were still forming. Every battle reinforced narratives fed to them by their villages. The enemy is dangerous. The enemy threatens your home. The enemy must be stopped. No one paused to question whether the enemy was also 12. In this atmosphere, promotions became both honor and burden. Kakashi's advancement to Jonin elevated him above peers who had once trained beside him. Responsibility increased. Expectations hardened. His confidence, already formidable, calcified into rigidity. And yet, cracks were forming. Obito continued lagging in certain technical areas, particularly in activating his Sharingan. The Uchiha bloodline carried prestige within Konoha, but it also carried pressure. Watching Kakashi excel so effortlessly fueled Obito's determination and insecurity. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted to stand beside his teammate as equal, not as liability. The war accelerated these insecurities. Assignments no longer allowed room for gradual growth. Mistakes had consequences measured in lives. The boys were not merely training for adulthood. They were stepping into it unprepared. Minato attempted balance. He praised Kakashi's strategic brilliance, but gently challenged his emotional distance. He encouraged Obito's resilience, but pushed him toward discipline. He trusted Rin's intuition implicitly, often seeking her perspective when tensions flared. For a time, this equilibrium held. But the third great ninja war had a way of amplifying fault lines. The Kannabi Bridge mission began forming in strategic discussions among Leaf commanders. Iwagakure's supply routes needed disruption. The bridge served as a crucial artery, feeding enemy forces stationed near contested borders. Destroying it would weaken their capacity to sustain prolonged engagement. It was, on paper, a tactical objective, but assigning such a mission to a team containing children revealed how normalized this reality had become. Kakashi viewed it as opportunity, a chance to prove his capability fully. Obito saw it as another step toward earning recognition. Rin saw the tension beneath both. Minato accepted the assignment with quiet resolve. He likely understood more than he said, because wars shape the young in ways that cannot be undone. The third great ninja war was not yet at its most explosive moment, but with Team Minato, the emotional groundwork for tragedy was complete. Ideals clashed gently now, but under the right pressure, they would fracture violently. And that pressure was coming. For now, though, they move forward together. 3 children and their teacher, toward a bridge that would not only alter the course of the war, but redefine the entire future of the shinobi world. By the time the Kannabi Bridge operation was approved, the Third Great Ninja War had shifted into a battle of endurance. Iwagakure's forces were entrenched along critical supply corridors, using terrain and manpower to slowly grind down opposing resistance. Their numbers were formidable. Their fortifications were methodical. Direct confrontation would have required heavy casualties from Konohagakure, something the Leaf could no longer afford without risking collapse on other fronts. So the strategy changed. Instead of breaking the army, they would break its lifeline. Kannabi Bridge was not glamorous. It was not a capital city or a symbolic stronghold. It was infrastructure, stone and timber spanning a gorge, allowing Iwagakure's supply units to transport weapons, food, medical provisions, and reinforcements to active battle zones. Destroying it would not end the war, but it would weaken it. And sometimes, weakening an enemy is more decisive than defeating them outright. Minato Namikaze received the assignment with measured calm. His role would be to draw attention on one front, engaging high-level enemy forces and creating diversion. Meanwhile, Kakashi Hatake, newly promoted to Jonin, would lead a smaller teams to infiltrate and sabotage the bridge itself. It was a significant vote of confidence. It was also an enormous burden. For Kakashi, this mission represented validation, proof that adherence to rules and tactical precision justified early promotion. He studied the route maps obsessively. He memorized patrol patterns gathered by intelligence units. He analyzed potential choke points and fallback routes. Every variable was calculated. Obito and Rin followed his lead, though not without unease. The journey toward Kannabi Bridge began under heavy cloud cover, the air thick with distant tremors from other clashes. Forest terrain gradually thinned into rocky outcroppings as they neared Iwagakure's operational zone. Even before contact, tension settled into their movements. This was no longer a training exercise. Enemy shinobi intercepted them sooner than expected. The first skirmish was fast and violent. Iwa's fighters were seasoned, Earth-style users who manipulated terrain to trap and isolate targets. Stone walls erupted beneath their feet. Projectiles launched from blind angles. Kakashi responded with efficiency, cutting through obstacles with precise chakra control. His blade moved decisively. His orders were sharp. Obito struggled to match the pace. He fought with determination, but his reactions lagged behind Kakashi's clinical timing. Rin, supported with medical ninjutsu, and defensive coordination. Her focus unwavering even as debris rained around them. They survived the encounter, but not without consequence. Shortly afterward, Rin was captured during a sudden counteroffensive. The enemy recognized her value immediately. A medical Enin was not merely support. She was strategic leverage. The mission parameters became brutally clear. Retrieve Rin and risk failure, or proceed to the bridge and complete the objective. Kakashi chose the mission. The words came coldly, shaped by years of internalized doctrine. The bridge must be destroyed. The war demands sacrifice. One shinobi cannot outweigh the objective. Obito stared at him in disbelief. For Obito, this was not theoretical. Rin was not a strategic asset. She was a teammate, a friend, someone whose presence anchored their fractured dynamic. To abandon her under the banner of duty felt like betrayal, not only of Rin, but of what it meant to be a comrade. The argument between them was not loud. It was devastating. Kakashi repeated the code. Those who abandon the mission are worse than scum. Obito responded with something deeper. Those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. Then he turned back toward the enemy's hideout, alone. For a moment, Kakashi remained still. And in that stillness, something shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of his father, condemned for prioritizing comrades. Perhaps it was the realization that his rigid adherence to rules had not protected Rin from capture in the first place. Perhaps it was simply that Obito's conviction pierced through the armor Kakashi had built around himself. He followed. The rescue operation was chaotic. The enemy had prepared traps, expecting pursuit. Earth-style barriers sealed corridors. Explosive tags lined escape routes. The confined space amplified danger. Kakashi fought with sharpened urgency, cutting through opponents with lethal efficiency. Obito, fueled by raw determination, pushed forward recklessly. And then it happened. Cornered in a narrow passage, Obito's desperation crystallized into awakening. The Sharingan manifested in his eye, Tomoe spinning into clarity as adrenaline sharpened perception. Movements that once overwhelmed him slowed into readable patterns. Attacks that would have landed were anticipated and countered. It was not just a power-up. It was transformation under pressure. Together, they freed Rin. But escape came at a cost. As they fled the collapsing cavern, destabilized by the chaos of combat, enemy shinobi triggered a final Earth-style technique. Massive boulders dislodged from above, cascading downward in crushing inevitability. There was no time for complex strategy. Kakashi was struck first, pinned, and disoriented. Obito reacted instantly. With Sharingan precision, he shoved Kakashi clear of the falling debris. and in doing so, placed himself directly beneath it. The rockfall consumed him in a thunderous collapse. Silence followed. Dust hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Rin screamed. Kakashi staggered to his feet, eyes wide, refusing to accept what logic already confirmed. They dug frantically, hands bloodied against stone. They found him, half buried, crushed beyond recovery. Obito's body was pinned beneath an immovable slab, the left side of his face intact, the right destroyed by impact. Blood mingled with dust, but his eye, the Sharingan that had awakened moments earlier, remained clear. There was no anger in his expression, only urgency. He told Kakashi something simple, something that would echo across decades. Protect Rin. Then, in an act that fused symbolism and tragedy, Obito asked Rin to transplant his Sharingan into Kakashi's eye. A gift, a continuation, a refusal to let his power die with him. Under impossible circumstances, Rin complied. The transfer was swift, desperate, imperfect, but successful. Kakashi rose again, now bearing Obito's eye, not as trophy, as weight. They completed the mission. Kannabi Bridge was destroyed in a blaze of coordinated assault, Minato's diversion allowing the operation to succeed. Strategically, it was a turning point. Iwagakure's supply chain faltered. The leaf gained advantage. The war shifted subtly in Konoha's favor. But victory tasted hollow. Kakashi returned not as triumphant Jonin, but as survivor, carrying a dead friend's legacy in his skull. The Sharingan granted him expanded perception, enhanced reflexes, tactical superiority. It also granted him constant reminder. Obito had defied doctrine to save a comrade. Kakashi had nearly abandoned one. The Third Great Ninja War continued to rage beyond this mission. But something irrevocable had already occurred. A child had died, believing in friendship over protocol. Another had lived because of it. And beneath layers of rubble that no one fully searched, Obito Uchiha did not die. But that truth belonged to shadows still gathering. When Kakashi Hatake returned from the Kannabi Bridge mission, he did not return as the same person who had left. Outwardly, the reports framed the operation as a success. The bridge had been destroyed. Iwagakure's supply chain suffered significant disruption. Strategically, Konohagakure gained momentum in a war that had begun to strain its reserves. Commanders praised the precision of execution. Minato's diversionary assault and Kakashi's infiltration team were cited as examples of coordinated excellence under pressure. But war reports do not document emotional fractures. They do not record the sound of Rin's restrained sobbing as they crossed back into Leaf territory. They do not record the silence that followed every mention of Obito's name. They do not describe the weight behind Kakashi's gaze as he adjusted to the foreign presence now embedded within him. The Sharingan in his left eye was not merely a tactical advantage. It was inheritance. Rin had performed the transplant in a moment of chaos, guided by emergency medical training and sheer resolve. The procedure was far from ideal. Battlefield surgery, conducted in a collapsing cavern. Yet it succeeded. When Kakashi first opened his eye afterward, the world sharpened into unfamiliar clarity. Movement traced with predictive arcs. Chakra signatures shimmered with defined structure. The tomoe spun gently in response to stimuli, instinctive and alive. It was extraordinary power, and it was not his. The physical adaptation came quickly. The psychological one did not. Every time he activated the Sharingan, he was forced to confront the memory of how he received it. Obito's final expression. The choice made without hesitation. The accusation embedded in that choice that comrades matter more than rules. For a shinobi who had built his identity on discipline and mission success, this contradiction cut deeply. Minato recognized the shift immediately. He did not press Kakashi with overt consolation. Instead, he observed. He allowed space. The war still demanded attention. There was little opportunity for prolonged mourning. Yet, in quiet moments between assignments, Minato adjusted his guidance. He spoke less about regulation and more about judgment, less about completion and more about meaning. The Third Great Ninja War did not pause for grief. Missions resumed. Skirmishes continued along unstable borders. Iwagakure responded to the destruction of Kannabi Bridge with intensified patrols and retaliatory strikes. Kumogakure expanded its operations in other contested regions, seeking advantage wherever opportunity presented itself. The world did not slow simply because one team had lost a member. But within Kakashi, something fundamental was rearranging. He began to approach combat differently, not recklessly, not emotionally, but with an awareness that rigid adherence to protocol could blind him to human cost. The Sharingan amplified his analytical capacity, allowing him to anticipate enemy movements with precision that astonished even seasoned jonin. Yet alongside that heightened perception was a growing introspection. He no longer recited the code as absolute truth. He carried Obito's last words like a quiet counterweight to every decision. Rin, too, felt the absence profoundly. Obito had been her bridge between Kakashi's severity and her own compassion. Without him, the dynamic shifted. She remained supportive, continued fulfilling her role with calm determination. But a softness had been replaced by vigilance. War had claimed someone close enough to touch. The village acknowledged Obito's presumed death with ceremony befitting a fallen shinobi. His name was inscribed among the honored, his sacrifice framed as noble. Speeches were delivered about courage and loyalty. But public recognition rarely captures private complexity. To many, Obito was a young Uchiha who died heroically. To Kakashi, he was the embodiment of a moral challenge that would never fade. It is worth pausing to consider the symbolism of that transplanted eye. The Uchiha clan's Sharingan was more than genetic ability. It represented heightened emotional sensitivity. The power awakened through intense feeling, loss, love, rage, grief. By receiving Obito's eye, Kakashi did not simply gain a tool. He inherited a lens shaped by emotion, one that would respond to his own internal states, whether he intended it to or not. This altered his trajectory permanently. In battle, the Sharingan allowed Kakashi to copy techniques, analyze patterns, and respond with fluid adaptability. Word spread quickly that the White Fang's son now wielded an Uchiha eye. Curiosity mixed with unease among some in the village. The Uchiha clan itself observed quietly, their internal politics complex and layered even in peacetime. But no formal dispute arose. Obito's gift had been voluntary, born of sacrifice. Challenging it would have dishonored that memory. As the war progressed, Kakashi's reputation began to shift. He was no longer merely a prodigy who advanced too quickly. He was a shinobi tempered by loss. His efficiency remained intact, but there was restraint now, an awareness that power wielded without empathy risked repeating old tragedies. Minato, meanwhile, continued reshaping battlefields across the continent. His flying thunder, God technique, reached levels of application that bordered on myth. Entire enemy units scattered at the rumor of his approach. The Leaf's strategic standing improved steadily. Some within leadership began quietly considering him as future Hokage material, though the war still raged too fiercely for formal succession discussions. And beneath all of this, unseen by the Leaf, another thread moved in darkness. Obito Uchiha had not died beneath that collapsing rock. Rescued by Madara Uchiha, ancient, calculating, and nearing the end of his natural lifespan, Obito awakened in a cavern far removed from the battlefield. His body had been reconstructed with Hashirama's cells, grafted to replace what stone had crushed. His right side scarred, his sense of reality fractured. Madara fed him narratives of betrayal, of the shinobi system's inherent cruelty, of a world irredeemable through ordinary means. But that path remains ahead. For now, from Konoha's perspective, Obito was gone. The Third Great Ninja War continued carving its shape across nations. Yet the Kannabi Bridge mission marked a turning point, not only strategically, but emotionally. It exposed the fragility beneath rigid systems. It demonstrated that even children placed into lethal roles could make choices that challenged the very doctrine guiding them. Kakashi carried that lesson into every subsequent mission. Each time he activated the Sharingan, the tomoe spinning gently in response to danger, he was reminded that strength divorced from connection leads to emptiness. He would not fully articulate that understanding for years. It would manifest subtly in the way he later trained his own students, in the patience he showed beneath his detached exterior, in the insistence that teamwork matters above individual glory. But those seeds were planted here, in dust and falling stone, in a battlefield surgery performed by trembling hands, in a dying boy's refusal to let his power disappear. The war moved forward relentlessly, yet something within Kakashi had shifted permanently, not away from discipline, but toward balance. And that balance would matter more than anyone realized at the time. If the Kannabi Bridge mission marked the moment Kakashi began to change, the events that followed would test whether that change meant anything at all. The Third Great Ninja War was not fought in a single continuous front. It moved like weather across the continent, striking in one region before dispersing and reforming elsewhere. As Iwagakure recalibrated after the loss of Kannabi Bridge, other tensions intensified. Kirigakure, the hidden mist, operated with particular brutality during this era. Its internal culture had long embraced severity, and wartime only amplified that edge. It was during one of these shifting phases that Rin Nohara was captured again. This time, it was not Iwagakure. It was Kirigakure. The details were subtle, layered in deception. Rin was taken during an operation that seemed routine, an ambush executed with precision, the kind that suggests planning rather than opportunity. Kakashi fought fiercely, the Sharingan tracing enemy movements with sharpened clarity. But numbers and terrain conspired against him. Rin was extracted swiftly, disappearing into mist-controlled territory before reinforcement could arrive. What Kakashi did not know was that this was not random. Kirigakure had sealed the Three Tails, Isobu, inside Rin. She was turned into an unwilling vessel, a Jinchuriki engineered as a weapon. The plan was calculated and cold. Allow her to escape or be rescued, return to Konoha, and release the Three Tails within the village's boundaries, unleashing devastation from the inside. It was warfare stripped of honor entirely. Rin was not viewed as a person. She was a delivery system. Kakashi pursued relentlessly. The rescue unfolded across mist-covered terrain, the air thick and cold, visibility limited by both climate and intention. Kirigakure shinobi specialized in silent killing techniques, manipulating the environment to disorient their opponents. Every movement felt watched. Every sound carried threat. When Kakashi finally reached Rin, something was wrong. She was calm. Too calm. The seal within her pulsed faintly, though Kakashi did not immediately understand its full implication. She explained in fragments the three tales, the plan, the inevitability of disaster if she returned to the leaf. Her voice did not tremble. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. She had already made a decision. Kakashi, determined as always, refused to accept the premise. There had to be a solution. There was always a way to complete the mission without sacrificing a comrade. Had that not been the lesson learned at Kannabi Bridge? He believed in his own capacity now to find alternatives, bolstered by the Sharingan and sharpened judgment. But war rarely provides ideal outcomes. Kirigakure shinobi surrounded them in formation, forcing engagement. The plan had accounted for this possibility as well. If Rin attempted to flee alone, they would corner her. If Kakashi intervened, he would be overwhelmed. The mist's tactics were suffocating, a tightening circle of blades and jutsu designed to leave no escape. The battle ignited with violent intensity. Kakashi moved through opponents with lethal grace, the Sharingan predicting angles of attack before they manifested. Lightning chakra crackled along his arm, gathering into Chidori, a technique he had recently perfected, a high-speed thrust designed to pierce through defenses decisively. It was a technique requiring absolute focus and linear commitment. And in the chaos, Rin moved, not away, toward him. Kakashi lunged forward, Chidori aimed at an advancing enemy. Rin stepped into its path. The moment stretched impossibly thin. The sound was not loud, a piercing impact, more felt than heard. Lightning chakra tore through flesh. The momentum carried Kakashi forward before comprehension caught up to action. The Sharingan captured every detail in cruel clarity. The widening of Rin's eyes, not in fear, but in resolve. The faint curve of gratitude in her expression. She had chosen this. She had prevented the three tails from being unleashed on Konoha by ending her own life before the seal could be exploited. The battlefield stilled for an instant. Then it erupted again. Kakashi's scream cut through the mist, raw, unrestrained, stripped of composure. The Sharingan responded violently to the trauma, Tomoe spinning with heightened intensity. He moved like a force untethered, eliminating enemy shinobi with precision sharpened by grief. But victory, if it could be called that, meant nothing. Rin lay motionless at his feet. Far away, hidden within a cavern layered in shadows and artificial light, Obito Uchiha witnessed it all. Madara had ensured that he would. After months of recovery under Madara's watch, Obito had clung to one hope, that returning to his team would restore purpose, that Kakashi and Rin remained safe, that his sacrifice had meaning. Madara, patient and calculating, allowed this hope to persist just long enough for it to deepen. Then he revealed the truth. Through the manipulated white Zetsu network, Obito was brought to the battlefield in time to see Kakashi's Chidori pierce Rin's chest. He did not see the strategic context. He did not hear Rin's explanation. He saw only the image, his friend killing the girl he loved. The world fractured. The Sharingan in Obito's remaining eye spun uncontrollably, pain detonating into power. Grief became fuel. The Mangekyo Sharingan awakened in both him and Kakashi simultaneously. Two eyes linked across distance, responding to the same trauma. In that moment, Obito did not interpret what he saw as sacrifice. He interpreted it as betrayal. The shinobi system had taken everything from him, his childhood, his body, and now the person he cherished most. Kakashi's adherence to duty had once nearly cost Rin her life. Now, from Obito's perspective, it had ended it. Madara's ideology found fertile ground in that devastation. The idea that reality itself was flawed, that a world capable of such suffering deserved to be replaced. Back on the blood-soaked field, Kakashi collapsed beside Rin's body. Exhaustion overtook rage. The Mangekyo Sharingan, newly awakened, burned within him, but he did not yet understand what it meant. He only knew loss, absolute and irreversible. The third great ninja war had claimed another child, but this death was different. Rin had chosen her fate to protect her village. Kakashi would carry the guilt of being the instrument of that choice. Obito would carry the image of betrayal that reshaped his entire philosophy. Two boys bound by one tragedy, standing on opposite sides of interpretation. The war would eventually end through treaties and exhaustion, but this moment would echo far beyond its conclusion. Because from this blood-soaked field emerged two future architects of the fourth great ninja war, one seeking peace through connection, the other seeking peace through illusion, and both shaped irrevocably by the same loss. While Kakashi collapsed in the aftermath of Rin's death, believing himself the sole witness to that tragedy, another pair of eyes had already begun to reinterpret the world. Obito Uchiha did not experience Rin's death as a layered act of sacrifice. He experienced it as confirmation of something far more corrosive, that the shinobi world inevitably devours what is gentle within it. Madara Uchiha had prepared him carefully for that conclusion, though not through force. Madara did not demand obedience. He cultivated doubt. He fed Obito fragments of history, pieces of ideology, and long stretches of isolation in which resentment could grow uninterrupted. When Obito first awakened in Madara's cavern months earlier, he had resisted. His body was broken, half of it reconstructed through the implantation of Hashirama Senju's cells, bound together with artificial tissue grown from the white zetsu. He had felt anger, confusion, desperation to return to his team. Madara had spoken patiently of the world outside, of betrayal, of endless cycles of war, of a peace that could never be achieved through conventional means. Obito had rejected it. He believed in Kakashi. He believed in Rin. He believed in becoming Hokage, not through dominance, but through connection. Madara did not argue. He waited. Madara understood something fundamental about human psychology. Belief is strongest when untested. It is most vulnerable when shattered by experience. He allowed Obito to recover physically, to train, to strengthen his newly awakened Sharingan. He showed him records of past wars. He spoke of the rivalry between himself and Hashirama, not merely as personal conflict, but as proof that even the most idealistic leaders could not prevent systemic violence. The statue of the Gedo Mazo loomed in the cavern, silent and immense, a reminder that Madara's ambitions extended beyond any single war. Obito saw it daily, though he did not yet grasp its purpose. He sparred against white Zetsu clones, honing reflexes sharpened by trauma. His body adapted quickly to Hashirama's regenerative properties, granting him durability beyond normal limits. But emotionally, he remained tethered to one thought. He would return to Rin. When Madara revealed the battlefield scene through Zetsu's network, when Obito saw Kakashi's Chidori impale her, the fracture was instantaneous. The Mangekyo Sharingan awakened in his remaining eye with violent intensity. The cavern itself seemed to warp as his perception shifted. Pain and power merged into something transformative. In that moment, Madara did not need to persuade him. He simply observed. Obito left the cavern without hesitation, guided by fury and disbelief. By the time he reached the battlefield, Rin's body lay still. Mist shinobi remained nearby, unaware of the storm approaching them. What followed was not a calculated engagement. It was annihilation. Obito moved through them with a savagery born of grief, his newly awakened abilities distorting space itself. Attacks passed through him as though he were intangible. He countered with lethal precision, eliminating entire squads before they understood the nature of the threat. The boy who once arrived late to training had become something unrecognizable. Kakashi, unconscious from exhaustion, never saw the massacre. Obito stood amid the aftermath, blood soaking into the soil beneath a sky thick with mist. He looked at Rin's body and felt something colder than sorrow. He felt emptiness where hope had once resided. The ideals he had clung to, teamwork, friendship, the dream of Hokage, seemed naive in retrospect. If even Rin, who had embodied compassion, could be weaponized by the system and forced into self-destruction, then perhaps the system itself was irredeemable. When Obito returned to Madara, he did not argue. He listened. Madara's plan, the Eye of the Moon, was presented not as conquest, but as salvation. The infinite Tsukuyomi would cast an illusion across the entire world, trapping humanity in a dream where suffering did not exist. Conflict would cease because free will would be suspended. Pain would vanish because reality would be replaced. To a mind shattered by loss, this sounded less like tyranny and more like mercy. Madara framed it carefully. He spoke of cycles repeating endlessly, villages rising and falling, children trained for battle, peace treaties dissolving into new wars. He described the Third Great Ninja War not as anomaly, but inevitability. As long as chakra existed and humans wielded it competitively, conflict would persist. Obito, still reeling from what he believed was Kakashi's betrayal, found no counter-argument. His transformation was not immediate in outward behavior. He did not become a villain in a single declaration. Instead, his optimism inverted. The same intensity with which he once declared that comrades mattered above rules now fueled his conviction that reality itself must be rewritten. He adopted Madara's name eventually, but at this stage, he was still a student, absorbing doctrine through grief. What makes this period so crucial to understanding the broader arc of the shinobi world is that it connects directly back to the Third Great Ninja War's emotional core. Obito was not born monstrous. He was shaped by a system that normalized child soldiers, weaponized civilians, and prioritized strategy over humanity. Madara did not implant darkness into him. He provided an interpretation that justified it. Meanwhile, the world continued moving without awareness of this shift. Kakashi returned to Konoha, carrying Rin's body. The Mangekyo Sharingan, dormant but present within him. The village mourned another casualty. The war persisted across remaining fronts. Minato continued executing missions with increasing renown. Leadership within the Leaf edged closer to formalizing his candidacy for Hokage as the war's end approached. No one suspected that one of their presumed dead had just committed himself to reshaping existence itself. In the cavern, Madara's health deteriorated steadily. Age pressed against him. His reliance on the demonic statue and life-sustaining mechanisms became more visible. He needed a successor, someone young enough, powerful enough, and emotionally fractured enough to carry the plan forward beyond his own lifespan. Obito fit perfectly. He began adopting elements of Madara's identity gradually, training to refine space-time techniques that would later define his combat style. He studied the mechanics of the Gedo Mazo and the tailed beasts, understanding that their collection would be necessary to enact the infinite Tsukuyomi. Each lesson layered over unresolved grief, transforming personal loss into ideological crusade. The Third Great Ninja War had now produced two opposing evolutions from the same origin point. Kakashi internalized tragedy and moved toward balance. Obito externalized it and moved toward domination of reality itself. Both believed in their own ways that they were honoring Rin, and neither yet understood how deeply Madara's influence would entangle them in future catastrophe. As the war neared its eventual conclusion, nations prepared to negotiate from positions of exhaustion. But beneath that surface-level diplomacy, a new conflict had already been seeded, one that would not erupt fully until years later. The tragedy of the Third Great Ninja War was not limited to its casualties. It was that, in trying to survive it, some began imagining a world where survival required erasing freedom entirely. And in a hidden cavern lit by artificial roots and ancient ambition, that idea took solid form. Wars rarely end with clarity. They taper. They exhaust themselves. They leave behind scorched earth and signed documents that attempt to translate immeasurable loss into formal closure. The Third Great Ninja War did not conclude with a single decisive battle that historians could circle on a map. Instead, it slowed under the weight of attrition. Supply lines strained. Casualties mounted beyond sustainable thresholds. Smaller nations, already battered from serving as battlegrounds, could no longer support prolonged conflict within their borders. Even the great villages, proud and resilient, began to feel the cost in quieter ways. Dwindling academy classes, grieving families, empty seats at council tables. Kannabi Bridge had shifted momentum in Konohagakure's favor. Minato Namikaze's repeated dismantling of enemy formations accelerated negotiations. Iwagakure, recognizing the increasing disadvantage, began recalculating priorities. Kumogakure adjusted its aggression, unwilling to overextend without guaranteed return. Tsunagakure, facing its own internal pressures, sought stabilization rather than expansion. Eventually, treaties were drafted. Borders were reaffirmed. Prisoners exchanged. And the Third Great Ninja War was declared over. But declarations do not erase what shaped the generation forced to fight it. In Konoha, the aftermath carried a strange stillness. The village gates remained intact. The central market reopened fully. Missions returned gradually to standard categories rather than emergency deployments. Yet beneath the surface calm, the psychological landscape had shifted permanently. Minato's elevation to fourth Hokage followed soon after the war's conclusion. His performance during the conflict, not only his battlefield brilliance, but his composure under pressure, made him the natural successor. The village embraced him with hope. After years of instability, the idea of a young, capable leader symbolized renewal. His inauguration was met with applause. But even as he stood in ceremonial robes, part of him remained shaped by the war's lessons. He had seen how quickly idealism could collapse under strain. He understood that peace required more than military superiority. It required vigilance against the conditions that birthed resentment. Kakashi watched the ceremony from within the crowd, his visible eye calm, his transplanted Sharingan concealed beneath a forehead protector, angled carefully downward. He had grown quieter since Rin's death. Where once he debated passionately with Obito about rules and comrades, now he rarely voiced strong opinions. His missions were completed with precision, his reports concise and professional. Externally, he had become the model shinobi. Internally, silence expanded. The Mangekyou Sharingan rested dormant within him, rarely activated due to its severe chakra drain and emotional toll. He did not yet fully comprehend its abilities. He only knew that whenever he allowed memory to surface too vividly, the world around him blurred with strain. The Uchiha clan observed these developments carefully. Political tension within the village had not vanished with the war's end. The clan had been largely sidelined from high-level decision-making during portions of the conflict, a pattern that would later contribute to deeper fractures. But for now, the focus remained on reconstruction. Across the continent, similar processes unfolded. Iwagakure returned to rebuilding infrastructure lost during prolonged engagements. Kumogakure reassessed border defenses. Kirigakure retreated further into its isolationist tendencies, internal brutality intensifying in ways that outsiders barely understood. The hidden reign, as always, bore disproportionate scars. Though large-scale battles withdrew from its streets, the economic and emotional damage lingered. Yahiko, Nagato, and Konan continued developing the early Akatsuki as a peace-oriented organization, seeking to protect smaller nations from becoming collateral in future conflicts. They believed the war's end presented opportunity. They did not yet realize how fragile that opportunity would prove. And somewhere beyond the visible political stage, Obito Uchiha moved unseen. Madara's health deteriorated steadily. His time was limited. The responsibility for carrying forward the Eye of the Moon plan shifted gradually to Obito, who adopted layers of identity to obscure his involvement. He began operating under aliases, manipulating events indirectly, studying the tailed beasts and the balance of power between villages. The world believed the Third Great Ninja War had concluded. In truth, it had only rearranged the board. For those who fought in it as children, peace felt abstract. Kakashi could walk through Konoha's streets without hearing distant explosions. Yet the memory of collapsing stone and Rin's final expression remained vivid. Minato could draft reforms and oversee village improvements. Yet he knew that another war was always possible if systemic issues remained unresolved. The generation forged in that conflict carried dual awareness, gratitude for survival, and suspicion that stability was temporary. This tension defined the post-war era. Young shinobi entering the academy now studied from textbooks, updated with fresh case studies from the conflict. They learned about Kannabi Bridge as strategic brilliance. They heard of the yellow flash with admiration. They memorized the names of fallen heroes without fully understanding what those names represented in lived experience. History compresses suffering into bullet points. Those who endured it remember differently. Kakashi eventually took on new responsibilities within the village structure, his reputation solidified by the Sharingan's versatility. He became known as Copy Ninja Kakashi, a title reflecting both skill and mystery. Yet even this moniker masked the truth. His greatest lesson from the war was not technical mastery. It was restraint. Minato, as Hokage, sought to nurture a generation less burdened by immediate conflict. He invested in infrastructure, diplomatic channels, and measured intelligence operations rather than aggressive expansion. For a brief window, it seemed possible that the Third Great Ninja War would remain the last of its scale. But unresolved ideologies rarely dissipate quietly. In the hidden reign, Hanzo's suspicion of Yahiko's growing movement led to confrontation that would twist the Akatsuki's purpose entirely. In the shadows, Obito continued gathering knowledge about the tailed beasts. Understanding that control over them would be essential to reshaping reality. The seeds planted during the war were beginning to sprout, though not yet visibly. Peace, in this period, resembled a held breath. The continent rested. Villages rebuilt. Children were born who would never see the Third Great Ninja War firsthand. Among them was Naruto Uzumaki, though his story, too, would soon intersect with the consequences of this era. For now, the official narrative declared victory and closure. But for those who stood beneath falling stone, who carried transplanted eyes, who watched dreams die in mist-covered fields, the war did not end with treaties. It settled inside them, quiet, waiting. The Third Great Ninja War did not end in a single, decisive clash. It did not conclude with a triumphant cry or a clean surrender. Instead, it began to fade. The violence that had once raged like a storm across the lands slowly weakened, as though the world itself had grown too tired to continue. In the world of Naruto, wars are often remembered for their heroes, but the Third Great Ninja War is remembered for something quieter. It is remembered for its scars. By the time the conflict approached its final stage, the five great nations were no longer fighting for glory or dominance. They were fighting because they did not know how to stop. The lines between right and wrong had blurred. Alliances shifted. Old grudges resurfaced. Each village had lost too much to simply walk away. And yet each village had lost so much that continuing seemed pointless. The Land of Fire, home to Konohagakure, had suffered devastating losses. Entire platoons had been wiped out in foreign territory. Young shinobi had perished before their names were ever truly known. And within the hidden leaf, there was a growing realization that victory would not restore what had been taken. The same was true for the hidden stone, the same for the hidden cloud, the same for every nation pulled into the conflict. As battles continued across scattered fronts, a certain quiet understanding began to take hold among the leadership of the villages. The war had become unsustainable. Economies were strained. Resources were depleted. Families were fractured beyond repair. Even the most hardened shinobi could feel the exhaustion settling into their bones. It was not a single battle that ended the war. It was depletion. The loss of so many talented shinobi had changed the balance of power in subtle but irreversible ways. Legendary fighters had fallen. Promising prodigies had vanished from the battlefield. The next generation was thinner, less experienced, and more burdened by trauma than any before it. Among those forever changed were individuals who would shape the future in unexpected ways. One of them was Kakashi Hatake. By the end of the war, Kakashi was no longer a child. He had witnessed too much for that. The deaths of comrades, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet guilt he carried would define him long after the war had ended. The calm, detached demeanor he would later become known for was forged in these years, not out of indifference, but out of survival. Another figure shaped by the conflict was Obito Uchiha. Though the world believed him dead, Obito's survival and subsequent transformation became one of the most significant hidden consequences of the war. The ideals he once held as a young shinobi, dreams of becoming Hokage, of protecting friends, had been shattered beneath rubble and loss. In their place, something darker began to grow. And watching from the shadows was Madara Uchiha, whose long-laid plans found fertile ground in the despair the war had created. But for the villages themselves, the immediate concern was survival. Negotiations began quietly. They were not public. They were not celebrated. Diplomats and leaders met behind closed doors, speaking not of victory, but of cessation. There were no parades waiting at home, only widows, only orphaned children, only empty seats at dinner tables. The treaties that eventually formed were fragile, born not from trust, but from exhaustion. Borders were redrawn. Prisoners were exchanged. War reparations were discussed in hushed tones. No nation was truly satisfied, but all were too weary to demand more. In Konohagakure, the end of the war did not bring celebration. It brought silence. The village began to rebuild. Homes damaged by retaliatory strikes were repaired. Training programs were adjusted to account for the loss of experienced jonin. The academy continued to produce new students, but there was an unspoken understanding that they were being prepared for a world that had proven itself unstable. The Third Great Ninja War left behind an imbalance of power that would influence every political decision moving forward. Trust between villages was thin. Cooperation existed, but it was cautious and calculated. This fragile peace would last for years, but it would never feel secure. For some, the war ended on paper. For others, it never truly did. Veterans carried its memories with them. Nightmares of battlefields drenched in smoke and dust, lingered long after the physical wounds had healed. Friendships forged in combat were remembered with a mixture of gratitude and grief. Children grew up hearing stories of the conflict, often softened for their ears. They were told of bravery, of sacrifice, of heroism. They were not always told of fear, of doubt, of regret. And yet, those unspoken emotions shaped the next generation in profound ways. The policies enacted after the war emphasized strength. The villages could not afford vulnerability again. Training intensified. Intelligence networks expanded. Defensive strategies became more sophisticated. But beneath these practical measures lay something more subtle, a collective anxiety that the peace might not hold. For Konohagakure, the memory of the Third Great Ninja War became part of its identity. It influenced how leaders approached diplomacy. It influenced how shinobi were trained. It influenced how threats were perceived. It also created the conditions for the future conflicts that would follow. Because while the war had ended between nations, the ideologies born from it continued to evolve. Obito's descent into extremism was a direct consequence of what he witnessed and endured. The pain of loss, magnified by manipulation, turned him into a catalyst for future devastation. The seeds planted during the Third Great Ninja War would eventually bloom into the Fourth. And so, the war that seemed to end quietly did not truly disappear. It lingered in shadows. It lingered in memories. It lingered in the hearts of those who survived. The Third Great Ninja War reshaped the ninja world not through conquest, but through consequence. It weakened the old generation and forced the rise of a new one. It exposed the fragility of alliances and the cost of unchecked rivalry. It demonstrated that even the strongest villages could bleed. And in doing so, it prepared the stage for everything that would come next. When viewers watch the events of Naruto unfold, the rivalries, the betrayals, the dreams of peace, they are witnessing echoes of this war. The motivations of key figures, the distrust between nations, the desperation to avoid another global conflict, all of it traces back to these years of quiet devastation. The Third Great Ninja War did not produce a clear victor. It produced survivors. It produced orphans who would grow into heroes. It produced villains born from despair. It produced a fragile era of peace built upon sacrifice. And in the stillness that followed, the world of shinobi took a breath. Not a breath of triumph, but a breath of uncertainty. The war that shaped Naruto's world did so not through spectacle, but through the slow, steady erosion of innocence. It ended not with a roar, but with a tired silence, a silence heavy with memory, and heavy with the knowledge that peace in the ninja world is never permanent. As the Third Great Ninja War stretched into its later years, exhaustion settled over the shinobi world like a quiet, unrelenting winter. There were no grand announcements declaring how long it had lasted. There were no clear borders marking where one campaign ended and another began. Instead, there was only the steady continuation of missions, the endless rotation of squads, and the slow fading of innocence among those who fought. It was during this drawn-out final phase that the war's deepest scars were carved, not by sudden catastrophe, but by prolonged suffering. For the hidden leaf, the toll was immense. The once bustling streets of the village were marked by an absence that could not be ignored. Training fields were quieter. Memorial services were more frequent. And though life continued, as it always must, there was a heaviness in the air that had not been present before. The war had taken fathers, mothers, siblings, mentors. It had taken entire teams. And yet, the missions continued. At the center of this reality stood the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. His leadership during the war required not only tactical judgment, but emotional endurance. He bore the weight of every casualty report. Every fallen shinobi's name passed across his desk. He understood that behind each name was a family, a story, a future that would never unfold. But he also understood that hesitation could mean the destruction of the village itself. The conflict with the hidden stone remained particularly intense. Their forces were relentless, determined to assert dominance and weaken the leaf's influence. Skirmishes along contested borders grew increasingly brutal. There were no longer clear lines between offense and defense. Every side justified its actions as necessary survival. Among those deeply shaped by these battles was Minato Namikaze. By now, his reputation had spread far beyond the land of fire. The sight of his distinctive kunai was enough to send enemy units into retreat. His speed, precision, and calm under pressure had turned him into a legend still very much alive. The hidden stone, recognizing the devastation he could cause, reportedly issued orders allowing their shinobi to flee on sight if they encountered him. This was not merely a testament to Minato's strength. It was a sign of how desperately the war had escalated. When entire battalions were instructed to avoid a single individual, it reflected a level of imbalance that threatened to reshape the battlefield itself. Minato became a strategic deterrent, a symbol of overwhelming force that altered enemy behavior before a single strike was thrown. Yet even Minato was not untouched by the cost of war. Behind his composed exterior was a man who understood the gravity of every life he ended. He did not fight with cruelty. He fought with necessity. There is a quiet tragedy in that distinction. The difference between taking a life out of hatred and taking it because you believe there is no other path left. Elsewhere, other nations experienced similar exhaustion. The hidden mist, already known for its internal brutality, grew even more severe in its training methods. The hidden cloud pushed its shinobi to new extremes, seeking strength above all else. The hidden sand struggled to maintain stability amid resource scarcity and political tension. No village emerged from this period unchanged. For the younger generation of Leaf Shinobi, the war marked the end of childhood entirely. Those who survived their early missions matured rapidly. They learned to read the subtle signs of ambush in the rustling of leaves. They learned to conserve chakra with disciplined efficiency. They learned that hesitation, even for a moment, could mean death. Kakashi Hatake, still carrying the trauma of losing Obito and later Rin, became emblematic of this hardened youth. Once strict and rule-bound, he now navigated missions with a colder practicality. The lessons of loss had reshaped him. The Sharingan he bore was not merely a tool, it was a reminder. Every time he activated it, he carried Obito's memory into battle. Every victory was intertwined with grief. And yet, beneath the hardened exterior of many shinobi, something fragile remained. Bonds still formed between teammates. Acts of quiet kindness still occurred in the spaces between missions. A shared meal before deployment, a silent nod of reassurance. These small gestures became lifelines in a world otherwise defined by conflict. As the war neared its conclusion, momentum began to shift. Years of attrition had weakened all sides. Resources were depleted. Morale was frayed. Even the most ambitious leaders recognized that continued fighting risked total collapse. Gradually, negotiations emerged, not out of idealism, but out of necessity. The end of the Third Great Ninja War did not arrive with a single decisive battle that historians could neatly record. Instead, it faded through ceasefires, treaties, and the reluctant acceptance that no one could truly win. The shinobi world was too interconnected, too evenly matched in suffering. For the hidden leaf, the conclusion brought both relief and profound reflection. Victory, if it could be called that, felt hollow. The village still stood. Its borders were intact. Its strength had been proven. But the cost had been immeasurable. The names of the fallen were etched into memory, into stone, into the hearts of those who survived. The war had shaped alliances and rivalries. It had forged legends like Minato Namikaze. It had broken children and forced them to become adults. It had deepened the ideological divide between those who believed in strict adherence to rules and those who believed in protecting comrades at all costs. Most importantly, it had laid the emotional and political groundwork for the future. The children born in the aftermath would inherit a world stabilized by fragile peace, but haunted by unresolved pain. Among them would be Naruto Uzumaki, whose life would be defined by the very forces set into motion during this war. The Third Great Ninja War did not simply change battle strategies or political borders. It altered the psychology of an entire generation. It reshaped what it meant to be a shinobi. It taught that peace maintained by fear was unstable. It demonstrated that heroism and tragedy often walked hand in hand. As the villages rebuilt, memorials stood quietly against the horizon, reminders of what had been endured. Training resumed. Missions were assigned. Life continued, as it always does. But beneath the surface calm, the echoes of war remained. Soft, persistent, shaping decisions yet to be made. And in that lingering silence, the world prepared, unknowingly, for the next era of conflict. In the quiet years that followed the end of the Third Great Ninja War, the world did not immediately feel peaceful. The battles had stopped. The official declarations had been signed. The borders between nations had settled into their familiar shapes once more. And yet, beneath that fragile calm, there remained something unsettled. The earth itself seemed to remember. The forests where battles had raged grew back slowly. But sometimes, when the wind passed through the trees, it carried with it the faint echo of distant conflict. For Konohagakure, the war had been both a trial and a transformation. The village endured staggering losses. Families were left incomplete. Children grew up in homes shaped by absence. But from that sorrow emerged a generation unlike any before it. The Third Great Ninja War had not simply tested the hidden leaf. It had reshaped it. The students who trained during those years carried something different in their eyes. They were not naive about the world beyond the gates. They understood, even at a young age, that shinobi life was bound to sacrifice. This understanding did not make them cold, but it made them steady. It forced them to grow faster than children should ever need to grow. Among them were figures who would later define an era. A young boy named Kakashi Hatake, already hardened by loss, would eventually become a jonin of legendary skill and later the sixth Hokage. His sense of duty, forged during the war, would shape the way he trained his own students years later. He would carry the memory of Obito and Rin quietly, allowing their lessons to guide him long after their voices had fallen silent. Another child, not yet born during the war, but shaped by its consequences, would one day carry the Nine Tails within him. Naruto Uzumaki would inherit a world stabilized by sacrifices he never witnessed. The Third Great Ninja War laid the foundation for the circumstances of his life. The sealing of the Nine Tails, the death of his parents during the next great crisis, and the fragile alliances between villages that would later be tested again. Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, had risen to prominence during the Third War. His reputation became so formidable that enemy nations were ordered to flee on sight if they encountered him. It was during this war that his legend truly began, and it was the stability achieved after this war that allowed him to ascend to the position of fourth Hokage. The war created the hero, and the fragile peace elevated him. Across the continent, other villages experienced similar reckonings. Sunagakure, the hidden sand, emerged from the war weakened and economically strained. Its leadership would make difficult decisions in the years that followed, decisions that would eventually contribute to tension and mistrust. The seeds planted during the Third War would not remain dormant forever. Kirigakure, the hidden mist, entered a darker period after the war. Internal struggles and brutal policies would shape its reputation as the bloody mist. Though not entirely caused by the Third War, the instability and power shifts of that era accelerated its descent into cruelty. The scars of conflict rarely remain confined to battlefields. They spread inward, altering societies from within. Iwagakure and Kumogakure, too, recalculated their strategies. The Third War had proven that no single village could dominate without paying an unbearable price. Alliances became cautious. Rivalries simmered quietly, rather than exploding immediately. The shinobi world entered a period of tension that felt less explosive, but no less dangerous. It was a cold peace, a peace built not on trust, but on exhaustion. And yet, even exhaustion can be a teacher. The Third Great Ninja War revealed the limits of constant aggression. It showed leaders that endless expansion would only lead to generational instability. While it did not eliminate ambition or rivalry, it introduced a certain restraint. The villages had glimpsed the abyss, and for a time, they chose to step back from its edge. Within Konoha, the Hokage's office became a place of careful balance. Hiruzen Sarutobi, having returned to leadership after Minato's death in the next crisis, carried the compounded weight of multiple wars. His desire to maintain harmony within the village and avoid further large-scale conflict stemmed directly from what he had witnessed during the Third War. His policies were not perfect, and history would judge him with complexity, but his intentions were shaped by survival. The generation that came of age after the Third Great Ninja War grew up hearing stories of heroism, stories of sacrifice, stories of betrayal and redemption. These stories were not romanticized legends. They were family histories. And in those stories, a quiet theme persisted, that the world could break, but it could also be rebuilt. The Third Great Ninja War also deepened one of the most important ideological struggles in the Naruto world: the question of what it truly means to be a shinobi. Was a shinobi simply a weapon, a tool of their village, to be deployed and discarded as needed? Or was a shinobi something more? A protector, a comrade, a human being with bonds that transcended mission objectives. Obito's dying words to Kakashi challenged the older, harsher doctrine. Rin's sacrifice complicated the definition of loyalty. Minato's compassion demonstrated that strength and kindness were not opposites. These ideas did not reshape the shinobi system overnight, but they began to erode the unquestioned acceptance of cold pragmatism. By the time Naruto's generation entered the academy, the world still held tension. The great nations remained cautious rivals. Smaller conflicts flared at the edges of maps. But the scale of devastation seen during the Third Great Ninja War had not yet returned. In that fragile interval, children were allowed to dream. Naruto dreamed of becoming Hokage. Sasuke Uchiha, whose clan would later fall in a tragedy indirectly connected to the era of instability that followed the wars, dreamed of recognition and family pride. Sakura Haruno dreamed of belonging and strength. Their dreams were possible because a previous generation had endured what they endured. And as history would later show, the lessons of the Third Great Ninja War would become vital when the Fourth Great Ninja War erupted decades later. The alliances formed during Naruto's time, alliances between all 5 great nations, were built upon an understanding slowly cultivated since the Third War, that survival required cooperation. The Third War did not immediately create unity, but it made the cost of division unmistakably clear. In many ways, it was the crucible that shaped the modern shinobi world. It refined legends. It exposed weaknesses. It hardened survivors. And it planted questions that would only be answered much later. As we let our thoughts drift across the quiet fields where battles once raged, we can almost imagine the wind moving gently over tall grass. The scars remain beneath the surface, unseen but not forgotten. The world of Naruto is often filled with dramatic clashes and explosive techniques, but its foundation rests on something quieter. Memory. The Third Great Ninja War lives on not just in history books, but in the hearts of those who survived it, and in the lives of those born because others stood their ground. It was a war defined not by a single villain or a single decisive moment, but by the accumulation of countless choices, small acts of bravery, painful sacrifices, decisions made in seconds that echoed across decades. And when we look at the shinobi world as it exists during Naruto's journey, tense yet capable of unity, scarred yet hopeful, we see the long shadow of that conflict stretching behind it. The war that shaped Naruto's world did not end when the fighting stopped. It continued quietly, shaping policies, shaping friendships, shaping fears, shaping dreams. Until, one day, a new generation would step forward and attempt to finally break the cycle. And as the night settles gently over the hidden leaf, and the lights in the Hokage's office dim, we are left with a simple understanding. Peace is never born from silence alone. It is born from remembrance. And the Third Great Ninja War ensured that the shinobi world would never forget.